Peter Gray quite a lot on the pod, and if you aren't subscribed to his Substack, I definitely recommend it as a sort of thought-provoking little inbox filler to think about your practice, either as a practitioner or a parent. And this morning, his little missive hit my inbox, and it was all about economic inequality as a driver of intensive parenting. And, you know, he's written loads, both online and in his book Free to Learn, about childhood and about free play and the decline of free play and children and young people's mental health. And in his writing recently, he's really interested in finding data to support the reasons why children's mental health is suffering, and links between that and free play, and then also trying to kind of unpick some arguments that a lot of people make in terms of things like, oh well, it's since the internet that children's mental health is declining. It's
Right.
video games. That's the problem. And he actually looks at data to go, maybe not. Actually, maybe it's
Yeah.
let's look at school, let's look at other things. And so this particular article is about how in countries where there is a big gap between rich and poor, where the inequality is high, in those countries, when asked and surveyed, parents tend to describe the things that they see as important in childhood as things like hard work and
Hmm.
diligence and obedience and those kind of things. And those parents in those countries with a wide gap between rich and poor also tend to view their children's childhoods as a sort of period of resume building and getting as much experience in different things as possible. So some people might call that kind of helicopter parenting, where you're always on your kid, you're thinking about like how they're spending every minute of their time in order to better
Mm.
themselves. You know, they go to school, they go to homework club, they get picked up, they go to gymnastics, they go to football club, they go to a tutor, all of those kind of micro-managed childhoods, which I'm sure lots of us who are parents have had little tastes of that. And, you know, I'm not saying that it's evil, and neither is Peter Gray. It's just that it's
He's looking at
interesting
the
to,
drivers, like what is driving
yeah,
that, when
he,
that's interesting, isn't it? I
yeah, and
think.
it makes complete sense that in countries where there is a massive gap between what rich and poor, that parents are thinking for the good of their children. I need to try to address this gap for the sake of my
Mm.
child. I need to help them and support them, and the way that I'm going to do that and make them end up in this, you know, far
The
away.
phrase in here was outcompete their peers, which
Yeah,
I think is a very interesting, because it is a relative thing, and I think that's a thing that I wonder if there is more research around this thing of like whether because it's not just a cup filling kind of like fill. It's not about like filling every hour. The experiences I've had with either my own kind of like feelings around that, or parenting around that, or meeting other parents, is like it is always relative to the other people around you. The drivers is often that you like do it's as long as you're doing more than the people around you,
yeah,
that's the mark of success for this style of parenting, of resume building. So it's all relative, because it's kind of like, well, what's everyone else doing? Okay, let's do an extra 10%.
yeah,
um and then, yeah, like you were saying about that, in countries with like a higher standard, or like a higher a smaller gap between the richest and poorest families, that those families presumably feel that the material needs of their children will be looked after whatever the outcome.
yeah,
You know, they will not become unhoused, they will not ever necessarily like really struggle for food. And so the upshot of that is that you go, well, you know, childhood can be for childhood.
yeah.
um and that's not to say that people don't fall into being unhoused and, you know, food scarcity and stuff in those countries, but just to say it's less likely.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, and it's interesting, that idea of competition, isn't it? Because it's competition within um, peer groups, and then it's also competition on like an international scale. Like the amount of times
mm,
that you'll hear like education ministers talking about China or other countries who are like making more progress with their children's academic success and things like that, and it's like
mm,
it's this competition everywhere and comparison everywhere. that fuels this feeling of like, oh, I've got to do more, got to get them into academics earlier, got to get their enrichment better, got to, all
Yeah.
these things on
And
like a
that ties
tiny level and
into
international level.
and that ties into the conversation we had a few episodes ago now with Emma Brox, doesn't it? About that feeling of that, like, Forest School is the, she was saying that Mandarin is the thing in the States, and that is, through this lens, very resume building.
Sorry, that's my dog. Oh my goodness. Have you quite finished, Asa? Stop it. Hang on, let me just get him out. Asa, come here. Sorry about that. Let's rewind. Do you want to rewind to where you said Emma Brox?
Yeah. This is quite good. Riverside's got a button down at the bottom now for me that says mark clip. So it'll just put a little dot in the recording, which is great. Yeah, so that's obviously very similar, I think, to the conversation we had a few episodes ago now with Emma Brox, the Guardian article, and they were talking about Mandarin, and particularly that Mandarin is in the States this kind of like resume building thing. But that's kind of interesting if you then take that and go, well, does it still fit if she was saying Forest School is this kind of virtue signaling middle class parent thing in the UK, maybe? What is it that we're saying about that? Is that just a different way to look at it? Is that, I think that was one of the points that they were making in that conversation, was that like it has no direct resume building benefits. No one's going to go and be like, I applied for university with 8 years of Forest School under my belt, which is like very different to sort of think of it that way. But I do think that is one of the things. This will probably be a podcast in its own down the line, but I'm going to nail some colors to the mast. I'm kind of increasingly worried about the codification of the like results of Forest School. I think there is something that we are potentially about to lose by dissecting the frog, and that the driver at the moment, from a few different directions, from like mainstream schooling and from funding providers and from lots of other things, is top down, and it's to look at these like, the results driven stuff, the outcomes, and the very Western kind of scientific method of boiling it down and go, well, what specifically is it? Is it the trees? What happens if you don't have the trees? Is it this? What happens rather than like that kind of, which should it's a holistic practice. And guess what? If you look at it holistically and go, it's the everything, it's the, I think there's something unquantifiable in that we will lose if we drive. But that's I will ramble about that for so long.
I'll join you.